His name was Istvan. He was 42 years old. He lived in Budapest, Hungary, in a modest apartment on the third floor of a building that still had bullet holes in the walls from the war. He was a physician, a good one. Not rich, not famous, but respected. He spent 12 years building his practice, treating families in his neighborhood, showing up at 3 in the morning when someone's child had a fever. He did everything right. He saved money every single month. He kept it in the bank, the way responsible people did. By the spring of 1946, he had saved enough to buy a small house, maybe take a real vacation for the first time since before the war. Maybe finally give his wife the life he had promised her when they got married in a church with broken windows because the bombing had just stopped. He never bought that house. By the summer of 1946, the money he had saved over 12 years of waking up before dawn and going to bed after midnight was worth less than the paper it was printed on. Literally, a single egg in Budapest that summer cost 44 quintillion pengo. That is a 44 followed by 18 zeros. The Hungarian National Bank was printing banknotes with 100 million billion pengo written on them, and those notes became worthless within hours of being issued. The government had to hire mathematicians just to keep track of how fast the zeros were multiplying. Prices were not rising week by week or even day by day. They were doubling every 15 hours. Istvan would go to work in the morning, and by the time he came home in the evening, his savings had lost half their value again. Not because he made bad decisions, not because he gambled or speculated or trusted the wrong person. He trusted his government, his bank, and the currency of his own country. That trust destroyed him. What happened in Hungary in 1946 was not a minor economic turbulence. It was the single worst hyperinflation in all of recorded human history. The monthly inflation rate reached 41.9 quadrillion %. That number is so large that most economists struggle to put it into a sentence. To give you a sense of scale, the inflation rate in Weimar Germany, the one everyone talks about, the one where people famously used wheelbarrows of cash to buy bread, that rate was less than 1/10,000th of what Hungary experienced. Hungary makes Weimar Germany look like a rounding error, and yet Istvan was not an uneducated man. He was a doctor. He understood numbers. He understood systems. He understood that war had consequences and that economies could struggle. But he could not imagine that the government of his country would allow the national currency to simply cease to exist as a functional unit of value. He thought there were flaws. He thought there were limits. He thought the institution of money itself was protected by something. He was wrong about all of it. And by the time he understood what was happening, the game was already over. There was nothing left to protect. If you find this kind of financial history useful, please consider subscribing. It really supports the channel and helps me keep making these videos. And write your city or country in the comments. I'm genuinely curious to see where everyone is watching from and how this story connects people from different parts of the world. Now I want you to stop for a second and really sit with what I just told you. Because here is the thing that keeps me up at night when I look at what is happening in the world right now. Istvan was not careless. He was not reckless. He was disciplined, educated, and responsible with his money in every way that society tells you to be responsible. He did exactly what the financial system told him to do. He saved. He deposited. He trusted. And the system he trusted consumed everything he had built. So let me ask you something directly. Right now, today, in the year we are living in, where is your money? Is it in a bank account? Is it in government bonds? Is it sitting in a savings account, earning 2 or 3% interest, while inflation runs hotter than anyone in Washington will officially admit. Do you feel safe right now? Do you feel like you have done everything right and therefore nothing bad can happen to you? Because that is exactly how Istvan felt in the spring of 1946. He felt safe. He had done everything right. He had 12 years of work sitting in that account, and he was certain it would still be there in the morning. I am not telling you this story to scare you for entertainment. I am telling you this story because what happened to Istvan was not a freak accident of history. It was a pattern, a repeating, predictable, almost mechanical pattern that has played out in country after country, decade after decade. And understanding that pattern is the only thing that separates the people who survive these moments from the people who are destroyed by them. It didn't start with chaos. It started with reassurance. That's the part nobody tells you. Every collapse you've ever heard about, every currency that went to zero, every savings account that evaporated, every middle-class family that woke up financially destroyed, it didn't begin with panic. It began with calm voices, official statements, experts on television saying, "The situation is under control." It began with stability, with confidence, with the exact same feeling you probably have right now. And that is not a coincidence. That is the pattern. Once you see it, you can't unsee it, because currency collapse is not an accident. It is not a natural disaster like an earthquake or a hurricane. It is a process, a sequence, a system that unfolds step by step, almost like a script that has been followed over and over again in more than 20 countries across the last 100 years. 5 stages, always the same 5. Stage 1, expansion. The government starts spending more than it collects. Not a little more, significantly more. Wars, social programs, bailouts, stimulus. The reasons always sound justified. They always sound temporary. We just need to get through this period. So the gap is filled the easiest way possible, by creating new money. Quietly at first, then more aggressively. Stage 2, denial. Prices begin to rise, but officials insist it's temporary. You hear phrases like transitory inflation, supply chain disruptions, unexpected external shocks. Central banks assure you they have tools. They always have tools. The message is simple. Don't worry. Stage 3, acceleration. This is where things start to slip. Prices are no longer rising slowly. They begin to jump. People notice. They adjust behavior. They spend faster because holding cash starts to feel like losing money. And that behavior itself pushes prices even higher. A feedback loop begins. The system starts feeding on itself. Stage 4, loss of trust. This is the breaking point. Not economic, psychological. People stop believing in the currency. And once that happens, the math no longer matters. Because money is not just paper or numbers in a database. It is belief. And when belief disappears, value disappears with it. People rush into anything that feels real. Foreign currencies, goods, assets, anything they think will hold value for more than a few days. Stage 5, collapse. Rapid, violent, irreversible. Prices don't just rise, they explode. Doubling every days, then hours. Savings accounts become meaningless. Salaries can't keep up. The system resets, usually with a new currency, often after wiping out the wealth of an entire generation. Now here's the part that should make you uncomfortable. You've probably heard about Germany in the 1920s, maybe Zimbabwe. Those are the examples everyone uses because they're dramatic, almost theatrical. But they also feel distant, easy to dismiss. That was different, people say. That couldn't happen here. So let me give you examples that don't feel so distant. Yugoslavia, 1994. A European country, educated population, industrial base. Monthly inflation reached 5 quadrillion %. Prices doubled every 1.5 days. Not weeks, not months, days. Imagine going grocery shopping on Monday, and by Wednesday, everything costs twice as much. And your salary hasn't moved. Greece, 1944. A country with a long history, deep cultural roots, part of the European economic sphere. Prices doubled every 4.3 days. Families would receive wages and rush immediately to spend them before they lost value. Saving money became irrational. Planning became impossible. And here is the common thread that connects all of them. Hungary, Yugoslavia, Greece, and dozens more you've never even studied. Every single one of those countries believed their currency was stable, right until it wasn't. No one wakes up one morning and says, "Today our money becomes worthless." That's not how it works. The shift happens gradually, then suddenly, and by the time the average person realizes what's going on, they are already trapped inside the system. So, let me ask you again, and this time I want you to really think about it. What stage do you think we are in right now? Look around. Government spending at historic highs. Debt levels that would have been considered unthinkable just a few decades ago. Central banks expanding balance sheets by trillions. Inflation spikes that were called temporary and then quietly redefined when they didn't go away. Does any of this feel familiar? Because it should. And here is a statistic that almost nobody talks about, but once you hear it, it's impossible to ignore. 99% of all currencies that have ever existed no longer exist. Let that sink in. Not weakened, not adjusted, gone. Replaced, reset, erased. And the average lifespan of a fiat currency, money that is not backed by a physical commodity, is about 27 years. 27. Some last longer. Many collapse sooner. But the idea that any currency is permanent, that it is somehow immune to the pattern we just walked through, that idea is not supported by history at all. So when you look at your bank account, when you look at your retirement fund, when you look at the numbers on the screen that are supposed to represent years, maybe decades, of your life energy, you have to ask yourself a question that most people are too uncomfortable to even consider. Not, is my money growing? Not, am I getting a good return? But something much more fundamental. Is the system I'm trusting actually stable? Or am I standing in the exact same place Istvan stood? Just earlier in the timeline, before the acceleration becomes visible, before the trust begins to crack, before the numbers stop making sense. Because if history teaches us anything, it's this. By the time everyone agrees there's a problem, it's already too late to protect yourself. It did not happen in Germany. It did not happen in Zimbabwe. It happened in countries that thought they were normal, just like yours. That is the part almost nobody understands. You have been trained to think of currency collapse as something exotic, something that only hits failed states, corrupt regimes, places far away from your mortgage, your 9-to-5 job, your kids' college fund. But history does not care about your comfort. History runs on patterns, and the pattern of how money dies is brutally simple. It is not a tragedy, it is a program. There are 5 stages, 5 steps that have repeated in more than 20 countries across the last century, with only small variations in speed and style. Once you know them, you stop asking, could this happen here? And you start asking, which stage are we already in? First, governments spend more than they earn. That part you already know. Wars, welfare, temporary emergency programs, stimulus checks, bailouts for banks and corporations that are too big to fail. The bill for all of this is too large to cover with taxes alone. So they do the one thing that looks painless in the short term. They create new money, quietly, gradually, then aggressively, Second, they deny there is a problem. Prices start to rise. Groceries cost more. Rent creeps up. Gas is not what it used to be. Official voices tell you this is transitory, caused by supply chain issues, a result of external shocks. Central bankers go on television and speak calmly about tools and targets and managed inflation expectations. You are told to relax. You are told this is under control. Third, the machine accelerates. Prices no longer drift higher, they jump. You see it not just in statistics, but in your daily life. You are not imagining it. People change behavior. They start buying sooner instead of saving because waiting costs money. That simple shift, spend now, not later, becomes gasoline on the fire. The faster people try to escape inflation, the faster it grows. Fourth, trust breaks. This is the real collapse, not on a chart, but in the human mind. Money is a story everyone agrees to believe. When that story cracks, when people stop trusting the currency to hold value even for a week, the whole system flips. Citizens rush into anything that feels real. Foreign currencies, gold, food, tools, land, even cigarettes. Paper money becomes something you try to get rid of, not something you try to collect. Fifth, the currency dies. It is not a graceful decline, it is a cliff. Prices double in days, then in hours. Your paycheck is a joke before it hits your account. Your lifetime of prudent saving becomes a number on a screen that cannot buy a bag of rice. Then, after enough damage has been done, a solution appears. A new currency, a reset, maybe a redenomination that cuts off zeros and pretends this is a fresh start. The old money is quietly buried, along with the savings of millions of people. You might be thinking, okay, but that is extreme. That is rare. Is it? You know about Weimar Germany. You have seen the black and white photos of people pushing wheelbarrows full of cash. But let me show you something that almost never makes it into the documentaries. Yugoslavia, 1994. Not some tiny, chaotic microstate. A European country with factories, universities, highways, a middle class. In the early 1990s, it began to walk that same five-step path. By the peak of the crisis, prices were rising at a speed that is almost impossible to process. In 1 year, 1993, prices increased by more than 100 trillion%, according to academic studies. Other estimates place the worst monthly inflation at hundreds of millions of percent. Everyday life became a race. Workers were paid several times a day and ran out to spend their salaries before they turned to dust in their pockets. Greece, 1944. A Mediterranean country with a long history, a proud culture, and a currency people trusted, until they could not. As the wartime occupation and economic breakdown dragged on, prices began doubling roughly every few days. Imagine your rent, your groceries, your gas bill, doubling, then doubling again, inside of a single month. Saving in cash was not just stupid, it was suicidal. The only rational move was to buy anything real as fast as possible. Hungary, 1946. The worst hyperinflation ever recorded. The monthly inflation rate in the summer of that year reached roughly 41 quadrillion%. That is a 4, followed by 16 zeros. Prices doubled every 15 hours. The government printed a banknote with a face value of 100 million billion pengo, and it was effectively worthless the moment it was released. People watched the numbers on their money grow more and more ridiculous as the actual value collapsed. Do you see the pattern yet? These were not banana republics in the way pundits use that phrase to make you feel better about your own situation. These were countries that just a few years before their collapse believed deeply in the stability of their money. There were financial advisors. There were bank commercials. There were respectable professionals telling middle-class families, save in your national currency. Keep your money in the bank. You will be fine. They were not fine. And here is the statistic. Nobody in mainstream finance wants you to hold in your head for more than 3 seconds. Roughly 99% of all currencies that have ever existed are gone. Not weakened, not slightly inflated. Gone, dead, replaced. A study of hundreds of fiat currencies, government-issued money not backed by any physical commodity, found that their average lifespan is around 27 years. That is less than the length of a typical mortgage. That is less than the time between your first job and your kids going to college. So when you look at the dollars in your account, the euros, the pounds, any modern fiat currency, ask yourself, do you really believe you just happen to be living in the one era, under the one government, with the one currency that will magically escape a pattern that has swallowed almost every other currency in history? Or is it more honest and more uncomfortable to admit that you are inside the same script that played out in Hungary, Yugoslavia, Greece, and dozens of other places, just at an earlier stage? Because if the lifespan of a currency is measured in decades, not centuries, what does that say about money you are planning to hold for the next 20 or 30 years? You have been told that the risk is in the stock market, in risky assets, in anything that moves up and down on a chart. But the deeper risk, the one almost nobody prepares for, is that the measuring stick itself breaks. If 99 out of 100 currencies have already failed, then the question is not, could this happen? The question is brutally simple. When? And the people who get wiped out are always the same type: educated, busy, responsible, middle-class men and women who followed the rules, did what they were told, kept their money safe, and never realized that the real danger was not the investments they did or did not make. The real danger was the system they trusted. In the next part, we are going to talk about the tiny minority who survived. The people who did not just avoid destruction, but came out of these storms stronger. And no, they did not have secret inside information. They did not have PhDs in economics. They simply understood one thing most people never learn until it is too late. Not all assets die when money does. Not all assets die when money does. Some bend. Some even grow stronger in the fire. And almost nobody owns enough of them. You have been told a story your whole life. Work hard, save in the national currency, keep your money in the bank, buy a house, maybe some bonds, maybe a retirement plan. That story works only as long as the currency stays alive. The moment the money itself starts rotting, that script turns into a trap. So let's flip it. Let's talk about the 5 types of assets that, again and again, have shown a brutal, simple fact. When paper money burns, they are still standing. Each one comes with a surprise. Each one comes with a lesson people usually learn only when it is already too late. First, gold. You have heard the cliché 1,000 times. Gold preserves value. It sounds boring. It sounds old. It sounds like something your paranoid uncle talks about at Thanksgiving. But here is what almost nobody remembers about the last major global crisis. During the 2008 financial collapse, gold did not move in a straight, heroic line. It fell first. When markets crashed, investors sold anything they could to raise cash. Gold dropped along with stocks. People panicked. They said, "See, even gold is not safe." And the ones who did not understand what was happening sold at the exact wrong moment. Then, over the next 3 years, gold turned and climbed. From its low during the panic, it rose by well over 1.5 times. Not in a week, not in a month, over a few patient years. The lesson is not, buy gold and you will always be rich. The lesson is this: real assets can be violently shaken in a crisis, but what matters is who still holds them when the dust settles. Panic is what kills most people's chance to survive, not the asset itself. Second, foreign currencies. Imagine two nurses in Beirut. Same hospital, same salary, same city, where the local currency, the Lebanese pound, slowly, then suddenly, lost almost all its value. One nurse kept her savings in the local bank, in local currency, because that felt normal. That is what everyone around her did. Over a few brutal years, that money lost more than 98% of its purchasing power as the exchange rate crashed from around 1,500 to tens of thousands for a single dollar. The other nurse did something that at the time looked strange. She quietly converted the bulk of her savings into a foreign currency, dollars or euros, and kept them outside the local banking system. On paper, both women had savings. In reality, one watched her life's work collapse. The other preserved almost all of it. Same job, same effort. The difference was not intelligence. It was one simple decision: refuse to trust a dying currency. Third, exporter stocks. Now this one will sound insane until you understand the mechanics. In Venezuela, as the local currency melted down, the official stock market index exploded higher by thousands of percent over a few years. People saw headlines like, "Venezuelan stocks rise by 34 times," and thought it was a joke. How can a market be booming when the economy is a disaster? The answer is simple. A stock is not just a line on a screen. It is a claim on real assets: factories, oil fields, warehouses, shipping fleets, companies that sell goods abroad and earn foreign currency. When the local money collapses, those real assets do not vanish. They are simply repriced in a new, more honest way. Measured in a dying currency, the stock market looks like it skyrockets. Measured in something real, it is often just reflecting the destruction of the unit of account. The lesson: owning slices of businesses that sell to the world, not just to your local neighborhood, can be a lifeline when your home currency loses touch with reality. Fourth, barter goods. This is the one sophisticated people laugh at until they are hungry. After the war, in shattered parts of Germany, there was a shadow economy that had nothing to do with official money. Cigarettes became a de facto currency. People traded them for food, clothing, repairs. The supply of cigarettes was limited, people trusted them, and they were divisible. When a big shipment of cigarettes suddenly entered that microeconomy, something fascinating happened. Inflation appeared inside that small world. Prices for goods quoted in cigarettes began to rise, more units of money chasing the same goods. That tiny example proves a massive point. Money is not magic ink and special paper from a central bank. Money is anything a community agrees to trust. In a breakdown, that can be cigarettes, fuel, canned food, medicine, tools. The paradox is this: the more advanced a society is, the less prepared its people usually are to function in a world where official money stops working. The people who own practical tradable stuff suddenly discover they are holding the only real liquidity that matters. Fifth, land. On the surface, land looks like the ultimate safe haven. They are not making more of it. It produces food. It holds real value when paper promises fail. In plenty of crises, people who owned farmland and productive land survived and even thrived while their urban relatives struggled. But here is the twist almost nobody wants to think about. In Zimbabwe, when the currency and the economy went into a tailspin, The government did not just let the markets sort things out. It used force. Farms were seized by decree. Productive agricultural land changed hands not through contracts, but through political power. Over roughly a decade, agricultural output collapsed by more than half. The land was still there. The soil still existed. But the legal framework that allowed you to benefit from owning that land was ripped away. The lesson is brutal. Land is real, but it is also visible. It can be taxed, regulated, seized. The state knows where it is. In a crunch, that bright red dot on a map can become a target. Land can save you in one scenario and become a liability in another. So where does this leave you? You have just seen 5 categories of assets that behave very differently from a savings account when currencies are stressed. Gold that punishes panic and rewards patience. Foreign currencies that act like a lifeboat when your own ship goes down. Exporter stocks that look insane in local terms, but simply track reality in global terms. Barter goods that remind you money is just a story. Land that feeds you, but also exposes you. The question is not, which one is perfect? None of them is flawless. The real question is much sharper. How many of your current assets are attached by the throat to a single national currency and a single legal system? And if the honest answer is almost all of them, then you are not diversified. You are concentrated. In the next part, we are going to attack the most dangerous illusion of all, the so-called safe instruments your advisor loves to recommend. The ones that calmly bleed your wealth while making you feel protected. Before we go there, tell me this. In your own life right now, what do you rely on most? Bank deposits, retirement accounts, or real assets like property and metals? It is not the things you fear that usually destroy your money. It is the things you trust. You have been told that government bonds are safe, that bank deposits are secure, that city real estate is the ultimate store of value. These ideas feel so normal, you barely question them. But in every real crisis, in every real collapse, these exact comfort zones turn into the most efficient wealth traps ever invented. Let's pull the mask off. Think about government bonds. On paper, they sound perfect. Backed by the state, regular interest, rated by agencies with serious names. Your advisor calls them risk-free or conservative. But what does risk-free actually mean? Free of what risk? Ask the people who held Argentine government bonds in the early 2000s. They thought they were lending to a sovereign nation, not to a gambler at a casino. Then came the default, the restructuring, the legal battles that dragged on for years. In the end, many bondholders lost the majority of their money in real terms. The number printed on the bond meant nothing when the state simply decided it would not pay that number back in full. That is the quiet truth about bonds. You are making one giant concentrated bet on a single thing, that the government will remain both willing and able to pay you back in money that still has value. If the currency weakens, your interest payments are eaten by inflation. If the state hits a wall, you are at the back of the line, waiting politely while the rules of the game are rewritten. Now look at the thing almost everyone feels is untouchable. The bank deposit. The story sounds solid. Your money is insured. Your balance does not move. You open your app and see the same number every morning. It feels calm. It feels stable. But that feeling is an illusion, built on one simple trick. They show you the nominal number, not the real value. In Lebanon, ordinary people kept their life savings in local banks for years. The balance on screen still looked impressive. 6 figures, maybe 7. Then the currency began to slide, first slowly, then violently. The Lebanese pound went from roughly 1,500 per dollar to tens of thousands, even around 100,000 on the parallel market. At the same time, banks imposed unofficial controls, blocking withdrawals, limiting access. On paper, many depositors still had money. In reality, their purchasing power was burned down to a tiny fraction of what it once was. Think about that for a moment. Your balance remains. Your insurance still exists. The system has kept its promise at the level of symbols. But the only thing that actually matters, what you can buy with that money, has been quietly murdered. That is what a deposit becomes in a currency crisis. A slow-motion confiscation, disguised as stability. Then, there is urban real estate, the dream of every middle-class family. A condo in a good area, a townhouse in a growing city. The logic is simple. People always need a place to live, so this must be safe. But safety depends on one brutal question: who controls the rules? In a serious breakdown, tenants lose jobs. Their businesses fail. Their cash flow dies. They stop paying, not because they want to cheat you, but because they are fighting to eat. At the same time, local governments, desperate for revenue, look for anything they can still tax. And what is easier to tax than property that cannot move? You are squeezed from both sides. No rent coming in. Taxes still going out. Repair costs rising with inflation. Regulatory changes hitting you with new obligations. And unlike gold or a foreign account or a bag of silver coins, your building stands there in plain sight. It cannot hide. It cannot be carried across a border. It is a perfect, immobile target for any policy born out of desperation. In some countries, it does not stop at taxes. Mandatory contributions, special levies, empty home penalties. In extreme cases, expropriation. Your proud store of value turns into a liability that eats cash instead of generating it. Now put these pieces together. Government bonds, bank deposits, city real estate, they have one thing in common. They are designed to make you feel safe, to make you feel responsible, to make you feel like a good citizen who trusts the system. They reward compliance with a warm psychological blanket. But in every historical crisis, these same instruments lined people up for the slaughter. That is why this part is so emotional. Because I am not talking about speculators here. I am talking about people like you. People who sat across from a smiling banker or a well-dressed advisor and heard words like conservative, capital preservation, safe income, and then watched their future disappear. So I want to ask you a question that almost nobody ever asks out loud. How much of what you call your financial plan is actually just a set of assumptions the system fed you to keep your money trapped where it is easiest to control, tax, and devalue? When you say, "I am safe, I have savings," what do you really mean? Do you mean you have purchasing power stored in assets that can survive a currency shock? Or do you mean you have numbers on a screen that depend entirely on one government, one central bank, one legal system, one story continuing forever without interruption? Be honest with yourself. If tomorrow morning your country announced emergency capital controls, limits on how much you could transfer, how much you could withdraw, how much foreign currency you could legally own, what would happen to your plan? If new taxes hit property owners hard because we all have to share the burden, what would happen to your safe house or rental? If inflation quietly ran hotter than official numbers for 5, 10, 15 years straight, eating 10, 20, 30% of your real wealth while interest on your deposits lagged far behind, would you even notice in time to react? Or would you wake up one day like those Lebanese depositors, those Argentine bondholders, those middle-class property investors in countries under stress, staring at assets that look solid on paper but behave like traps in reality. Here is the provocation you probably need to hear. How much of what you proudly call a diversified portfolio is really just a collection of different flavors of the same risk? Exposure to one fragile system that assumes the currency will always work, the banks will always pay, the state will always play fair. And how much of it would survive if that assumption broke? Because if the honest answer is not much, then your problem is not lack of discipline. It is not lack of work ethic. It is not lack of intelligence. Your real problem is that you have been playing a game designed by people whose priority is not your survival. In the final part, we are going to stop talking about theory. We are going to talk about now, about the signals already flashing in the world, from gold rushes in unstable countries to black market exchange rates that tell the real story, to the record-breaking debts of the United States and the slow erosion of dollar dominance. Then we are going to build a concrete plan. 3 simple layers of defense that any normal person can start putting in place. And we are going to go back to that doctor in Hungary, the man who did everything right according to the rules of his time. And you will see what his life could have looked like if somebody had told him this truth 20 years earlier. Before I write that final part, tell me, do you want the plan to lean more toward conservative capital protection, or are you ready to hear a more aggressive, high-conviction strategy?